Tales of the Jedi has done something that was very much needed for on-screen Star Wars, in that it outwardly shows the bigotry and corruption that has progressively grown in the Jedi Order, like a bad mold. The prequel movies show us in more subtle ways how the Jedi, specifically the High Council, had become rigid and stale, stuck in their old ways and believing that it was their judgment which held precedent over anything and anyone else. All the while, they were placating to the Republic politics and became like the Senate's lapdogs. A harsh explanation, but a necessary one. We see a lot of this in Revenge of the Sith as well as the Clone Wars, but only Tales of the Jedi has truly shown the Jedi for what they have become. Heretofore, the corruption of the Jedi has been mostly something that has been explored in the comics and the novels, with only a few hints in what is happening on the big screen. The most we got of this topic was in the Clone Wars arc where Ahsoka was on the run. However, I am super glad that we have an overt representation of exactly how far the Jedi have fallen, with it being the primary focus of Dooku's story arc in Tales of the Jedi, and how they interconnect with one another. There is, however, one story that I solely wish had been put on the screen in the Clone Wars story arc, that being the story told in the novel Dark Disciple, which is the topic of today's video, and how the Jedi Council themselves fell in the deepest pits of revenge and signaled their imminent demise, specifically revolving around the former Jedi Dooku and his assassination. The main plot of Dark Disciple is that Quinlan Vos is given a very concerning mission, which is to assassinate Count Dooku. Assassination seems like something that is beneath the Jedi, especially how they preach themselves to be in the Clone Wars. I find this specific story arc to be one of the most egregious transgressions committed by the Jedi High Council. Their reasoning was that Count Dooku had simply grown out of control and needed to be stopped, even if that meant his death. The Council believed that it was the only way to end the war. They had given the task to Jedi Master Quinlan Vos, who was very experienced with covert missions and was a rather fine combatant himself, able to contend maybe with Dooku on his best day. The story plays out that Quinlan Vos tracks down Asajj Ventress and gets in good terms with her so that he can gain more information on his target and hunt down Dooku in the process. However, Ventress finds out that he is a Jedi, but accepts his mission to kill Count Dooku nonetheless. However, Ventress convinces him that he needs the dark side in order to truly kill and conquer Dooku, Darth Tyrannus. Long story short, Quinlan Vos turns to the dark side, but butchers the assassination attempt and fails completely, as he ends up captured by Dooku and made into his would-be apprentice, subjugated and enslaved, tortured even by the dark side itself. Anyway, the point of this isn't the wider story, but mostly the mission itself taken upon by the Jedi Council and given to Quinlan Vos. The fact that the Jedi High Council stooped as low as commissioning an assassination, which resulted in one of their own turning to the dark side. The very fact of wishing to kill someone is, in itself, a notion bred by the dark side. One would think that the Jedi High Council would recognize this pattern of thinking, which led them to a very dark place. In our opinions, this is the greatest indicator that the Jedi of the Clone Wars needed to be destroyed. The Clone Wars had a tremendous impact on the Jedi Order as a whole, as it echoed back nearly 1,000 years prior, where General Hoth's Army of Light face off against Lord Khan's Brotherhood of Darkness. In this war, specifically the 7th Battalion of Ruusan, the two sides began to meld and become intertwined. The lines between the light and dark side blurred as the war dredged on. The two sides were weary, and the Jedi were cutting moral corners and taking easy ways out. Jedi General Hoth himself was teetering dangerously on the edge of falling to the dark side. It was only after the detonation of the thought bomb on behalf of Bane and the subsequent Ruusan reformation that brought the Jedi Order back into the fold and back into one center. We did a video sometime back asking the question of if the Old Republic Jedi were actually worse than the Clone Wars Jedi. Well, we can bring those points up again here, as it seems that anytime the Jedi become militarized, it does a great deal of harm to everyone. Very few points in galactic history has Jedi military ever been a good thing, even though it was very necessary at the time. Revan and Malak's army resulted in them and their followers cutting moral corners, and we saw where that led them. Revan wanted to finally end the Mandalorian Wars with the weapon known as the Mass Shadow Generator, extinguishing tens of thousands of lives in half a second. In the War of Light and Darkness, General Hoth was to the point of having to buff his ranks with Padawans because he was running out of knights, and no other Jedi wanted to join the army, forcing Hoth to literally use child soldiers. It almost got to this point in the Clone Wars as well. The Ruusan Reformation saw that the Army of Light was disbanded, and that the Jedi Order would not be able to organize into military ever again. The Reformation also saw to it that the Republic itself would no longer hold an organized military, leaving each individual system to delegate their own planetary security force. Surprisingly, the Ruusan Reformation proved to be a stroke of fortune, as the 1,000 years that followed would surmise into the High Republic era, where the Jedi finally had their place as peacekeepers and guardians in the truest sense restored. However, once the Clone Wars was thrust upon them by Darth Sidious and the Separatists, they were forced to renounce the Ruusan Reformation and take on the Grand Army of the Republic and go to war. We can see the impact of this and what it had on the Jedi Order, and their thought processes regressed even further until they got to the point where they actually decided to move forward with the literal assassination of Count Dooku, with this marking the truest extent of how far the Jedi fell. Quinlan Voss's fall to the dark side feels a bit sudden to me. However, upon analyzing the Dark Disciple novel further, I've come to the conclusion that this perfectly represents the attitude of the Jedi by this year in the war. It is this exact moment where the Jedi decide to assassinate Dooku, where they have gone beyond a point of no return. They were willing to do whatever it took to win, no matter the cost, no matter the code. They wanted to shoot first and pick up the pieces later. So of course, Voss is going to take the path that leads him to victory and accomplishment fastest. It's the only thing he's been doing for the entirety of the Clone Wars. By this point in the timeline, the Jedi have completely lost themselves, and unfortunately, barely anyone, not even ObiWan Kenobi, is exempt from this process. Even ObiWan Kenobi, who is usually the symbol of what we think of a Jedi should be, but in the latter hours of the Clone Wars, he too becomes short-sighted for a while, and this becomes apparent when he receives a seat on the Jedi High Council. Remember that it was Obi-Wan that convinced Anakin to spy on the Chancellor on behalf of the Council, and it was Obi-Wan that endorsed the assassination of Count Dooku, despite even admitting that he felt it was a bit extreme. Nevertheless, he gave Quinlan Voss tips on how to flirt with and even deceive Ventress, which ended up backfiring as the two fell in love. It's hard to resist the temptation to give Obi-Wan the excuse of the exemption, but we saw some of the worst Clone Wars and what it had done as he was on the front lines, leading the 212th Battalion. Even Obi-Wan Kenobi had been corrupted by the Clone War. Dooku had done some terrible things, but assassination should have been above the Jedi, especially the High Council. However, this just goes to show that even the most devoted to the ideals of the light side of the Force can fall when surrounded by oppressive darkness and confusing times. Unfortunately, ordering Dooku's death all went to prove his point all along, in the fact that the Jedi had been destroyed, and upon ordering that Dooku should be no more, his turn was cemented, the Jedi Council's defeat was cemented, and without them even knowing, the Clone Wars came to an end. Well, my friends, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to let us know if you like these more casual discussion type videos. Also, do you agree with our assessment that assassination is the unbecoming final downfall of the Jedi? We do know that there was a group of Jedi Sentinels known as the Jedi Shadows, which did go out on secret missions to eradicate all traces of the dark side. However, this is more like overt, politically motivated, cold assassination when concerning Dooku, and may be considered different. Until next time, my friends, may the Force be with you, be weary, and have a great day.